So we are honored to have here Professor Scott Stern. He is a professor at the MIT School of Management, and he's also the co-founder of the MIT RIP program. Thank you for being here, Scott.
Thank you so much.
One question that I have is, how did you came up with the idea of doing research on entrepreneurship and the ecosystems?
So first, thank you, and thank you for everyone here in Guatemala, here at the university, for hosting and for the entire good work of the MIT REAP Guatemala team. So about 15 years ago, I, along with colleagues at MIT, we had been doing a lot of more academic research on what made places be able to take advantage of innovation and entrepreneurship to drive economic development and social progress. What we saw was that there were so many regions and places around the world, both in advanced economies and emerging, in our growth economies, that really wanted to leverage innovation and entrepreneurship to take the next step. But unfortunately, simply a simple model like, let's be the next Silicon Valley, didn't seem to work. And so along with colleagues at MIT, we came together to form the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, REAP, which works with stakeholder teams around the world to bring together different members of an ecosystem: university, corporates, government even, risk capital, but of course, those entrepreneurs and innovators, and bring them together to develop a shared assessment of their ecosystem, and then take that shared assessment to identify key strategic initiatives that can move forward those ecosystems, accelerate and enable those innovators and entrepreneurs for impact.
That's great. Could you share briefly a story on the impact that the MIT RIP program has had?
So we've been very fortunate now to work with more than 90 teams around the world in our global program, and probably another 70 or 80 in satellite programs related to the REAP program. And we've been very fortunate that many of the teams have been able to use their time in MIT REAP to really have an impact on their ecosystem, both immediately in the short term and over on a sustainable basis. For example, we have a team from Nova Scotia, not the hotbed of innovation or entrepreneurship in all of Canada, but an important region, that realized that it needed to focus on its ocean cluster and also on enabling entrepreneurship among its disparate regional communities. And that led to two sustainable initiatives: the Ocean Supercluster Project and OnSide, that really continues to drive small business, innovation, and entrepreneurship in the region. At the same time, we've been able to actually have an impact on policy. We had a team from Nigeria, very much an emerging growth economy. And they actually realized during REAP that actually the entire legal framework for Nigeria was inadequate. The entrepreneurs were starting to gain a bit of traction in areas like fintech. There was a support of government and some support of corporates, and they came together to really drive the passage and implementation of the Nigeria Startup Act. Those are just two examples of different types of initiatives that have come out of REAP. And of course, we've been able to work with many teams, both around the world, but particularly here in Latin America, to really drive change.
Now that you have seen so many teams across the globe, what do you think that it makes the difference between teams that actually make a sustainable strategy, between those that don't make the momentum beyond the MIT RIP program in 2 years?
So I put two pieces on that. The most important is that REAP really encourages a change in the mindset, a mindset of each of those stakeholders to recognize that no one is in charge of innovation or entrepreneurship. Each stakeholder, government, university, risk capital, and corporates, play a role in enabling entrepreneurs and innovators. But ultimately, the job of building companies and the job of scaling tech has to be done by those entrepreneurs and innovators. But their job is not to build the ecosystem, it's to do their main thing. And so there's a kind of curious kind of challenge of really building and rewiring and scaffolding that ecosystem effectively. By really buying into that no one's in charge, but each stakeholder can make a difference, we see real impact by these REAP teams throughout the world.
And talking about this collaboration among the different stakeholders, how do you see a university not only supporting the innovation ecosystem, but actually taking the lead on a region like Guatemala that is an emerging economy?
So within a place like Guatemala, universities play a critical role. And for two reasons. First, historically, universities have produced entrepreneurs, have sometimes offered entrepreneurial education, but they haven't been a main player in enabling ecosystems. Ivory Tower. In contrast, the challenge and both the opportunity for universities today is to not simply be a supporter, but to lean in, to be actively engaged in working with industry, working with entrepreneurs, working with innovators to figure out how can we make that happen here? What are the things the university can do that can then be matched by amplifying actions in the private sector to allow both the university to improve and be more impactful, but also allow those private sector initiatives to succeed. Very concretely, I think for Guatemala, you see, right, I think the university here is really a leader in trying to focus on the role of entrepreneurship in Guatemalan society, the power of free enterprise in shaping economic impact. And the question is, how do we take that energy from the university and then work with those other stakeholders collaboratively, no one in charge, to really drive impact for everyone?
During the past 2 days, you have been giving many talks, and one of the concepts that many people is interested is in the concept of innovation-driven enterprises. Can you briefly explain how that is compares to small and medium enterprises? What's the difference between the two of them?
So early on in the REAP program, we recognized that, right, first requirement for making change is sharing some definitions, is understanding what we're talking about. And the challenge at that time was that when you use the word entrepreneurship, people have a lot of different views of what that word means. Most entrepreneurs in any country, and certainly in Guatemala, are either subsistence entrepreneurs or small businesses, very small enterprises that are not thinking so much about growth. They're thinking about putting food on their table. That is an incredibly important part of our economy. We need good programs to support them. But interestingly, that type of support for the small and medium-sized enterprises is not sufficient to encourage and help those innovation-driven enterprises. Innovation-driven enterprises, or IDEs, are enterprises where we're going to go deep. We might lose money for quite a while, but we start with a hypothesis about how we can go from an early stage idea to exponential growth and impact, creating the kind of very dynamic companies that really drive long-term economic change.
Yeah, that's what we actually need in Guatemala. So we have, in the past 2 days, you also have interacted with different stakeholders, industry, other universities, entrepreneurs, and you have seen many innovation ecosystems around the globe. How would you describe the Guatemalan ecosystem?
So there's a very important part where Guatemala clearly brings to the table a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, very entrepreneurial people, and also a support, I think, for entrepreneurship in many ways. And as well, it's been growing its university sector in numerous ways to support that innovative capacity, as well as some great work by the corporates. I think that next stage of the development of this ecosystem is to figure out, let me go back. So the next stage for this ecosystem is to be the specific strategic initiatives that will unleash the power of science and technology as the backbone for the formation and the scaling of enterprises that will be important here in Guatemala and will be important in the region.
Thank you. And lastly, if you could make one moonshot story for Guatemala in innovation, what would that be?
So the one thing I have been struck by here in Guatemala is that you are very blessed with a young population. Many countries out there in a similar level of economic development have much older populations, and that creates its own challenges in health and retirement. In Guatemala, you have a young population, and economic development is always one generation away from prosperity. If you are able to tap into and enable entrepreneurship, innovation-driven entrepreneurship, digital entrepreneurship, scalable entrepreneurship among that next generation, that can be done here at the university as well as elsewhere, I think we would see dramatic change in Guatemala and in Central America and beyond.
So thank you, Scott, for your time and also for making the time to come to Guatemala. I know that you have a very busy schedule.
Thank you so much.